Welcome to Books Boys, live from the Grand Library, the Dean and PJ.
Whoa! Guys, keep calm and read your tickets. PJ, we're using the Anna Karenina method here. He's PJ.
Hello there!
I'm the Dean, and we are the Books Boys.
The one and only.
This is the Books Boys show. Get it? Buy it? Books.
Books. What is it all about?
There we go. We nailed that intro.
We nailed that intro after all the practice. And but honestly, seriously, what is a book actually? So I've been trying to investigate it, and so I've gone past the toilet section and the supermarket. I believe it might be in the salad section because they're made out of trees, right? You know, books are made out of trees, right? It's made
Good thinking. Yeah.
So I thought maybe between the salads, you know, I'm a big salad eater myself. Maybe between the lettuce, there might be verses T.S. Eliot's and all the good boys.
Now, PJ, I'm not happy here. You've spent a long time lingering in the toilet paper aisle, and you're actually vegan. You eat a plant-based diet. Why is it taking you 2.5 years to make it over to the salad aisle for us?
Well, I think the thing is, I might have been eating the books. Hence, it hasn't been always as much as you. You've always read more. Except one time. I think we had one episode where I read more.
There was once, yeah.
But those are kids' books, so yeah, that was a bit different.
So there, long-term storytelling, we figured it out. It's because you've been eating the books all along.
I think that's what it is. It's vegan after, isn't it? It's ink.
Yeah,
well, I don't know if the ink is vegan, but But anyway, so that must be it, guys. So look between the salad for the new plays by the good lads, whoever you want to read next, or maybe a bit of Poe or a bit of whatever you want to read. I think it might be in the salad section. I
should mention as well, we're joined by little Alfred. Here he is. Now, a lot of the UK is going on strike tomorrow over their salaries, and Alfred will be joining them. I'm very sorry that we could not fulfill his desires, but he's here with us for today anyway.
Shocking stuff. Well, I'm glad you're here right now. So I suppose, the strike. This is the 25th of April, the recording date right now. So the 26th.
That's it.
Anyway, good time to read some books. So hopefully you can always take an opportunity to read books wherever you are, even if it's a time of stress.
I will certainly be reading tomorrow.
That's nice.
And I'll be going to see some Molière. I'll be going to see Tartuffe with Playboy Alex.
Very nice indeed. It's a bit of culture as well. That's lovely. And what about you, then? What have you been doing this month?
I've been doing a lot. So I'm going to see Tartuffe and also a Sister Sledge concert. What else have I done this month? I went to see an English indie band, Razorlight.
And also, what about Athens? Because we didn't talk, the last time.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We didn't really catch up on that. Alex and I talked about it on Playboys. But yeah, Alex and we went to Athens. We had a great time. We saw Athens itself for a couple of days. We did Corinth. We did Delphi to see the Oracle there. It was a fantastic time. We saw lots of monuments, lots of culture, ate a lot of Greek food. It was brilliant, yeah. And, there's more to do. We didn't do Sparta because really there's nothing there to see anymore. It's just a village. But we realized that there would still be some places we'd like to see. We were recommended, some of the islands, also like Thessaloniki up in, I think it's in the north. So you would need to visit Greece a few times to see like all the nice parts,
So, right, okay. So maybe it is your new thing. You're moving on from the Spain aficionado Spanish chat to the more Greek kind of oriented.
Well, you say that, but I'm actually visiting Spain in May, June, and July. So
shocking stuff. In fact, you're visiting me in May.
I'm visiting you in 3 or 4 weeks' time, yeah.
I do have 1 or 2 cultural places to show you that you might like indeed. So I'm just saying.
Nice.
I myself have had 2 weeks off during Easter, and I have just what have I been doing? I've just been writing and doing yoga and a lot of beach time and nature time and playing music with Elisa. And we even started mantra circles. We're hopefully doing that every weekend. So if you're in Las Palmas and you want to have some heart connecting mantras and some healing music, come and join us. So that's what we've been doing, really focusing on the music and kind of children books writing. So
nice.
It's been a lot of fun. And we had a birthday, so happy birthday to you, Dave.
Both had our birthdays. We are now both 31. Yeah.
It's a tender age, I feel. Tender age. No, actually, I feel it's a great age. I've enjoyed it.
Well, I don't know. I didn't mind turning 30. I was looking forward to turning 30, unlike most people. But I forgot that it was going to continue increasing after that. 31 took me totally unawares.
Oh, Lord.
But no, what else? I did some dance performances with my Mexican dance, dancing some polkas and some Veracruz. It's been a busy enough time.
Nice, cool. And what about on the literature sections? I've got one book to talk about this month, but it's some book, I'm telling you. It is, anyway, I'm looking forward to talking about.
Okay.
What about you? What have you read?
I'm going to start in what I think it's a good place, because I read this one. Well, I was honestly worried that I didn't do enough reading the first part of the month because I was enjoying my trip to Athens, but I caught up. So I read Marcos Chicot, El Asesinato de Platón. So this is only, I mean, it's not only available in Spanish, but it's not available in English. I think you can get it in Italian and French, as well as Spanish.
I think I have to translate the title, Dean. As usual, you're just assuming that everyone speaks Spanish who listens to the show.
So it's I mean, yeah, I would have said the death of Plato, but I guess literally it's the assassination of Plato, but he's not assassinated. So
yeah. Okay.
This one is just under 1,000 pages.
My God. Is this not the sequel to the assassination of Socrates?
It is, which is also just under 1,000 pages. And I actually read it 3 years to the day or to the week, which is interesting.
All right. Okay. Interesting.
The assassination of Socrates was a gift to me from Valerie the Pigeon Detective. And this one, I looked out for a long time for the sequel, and I eventually found it in a bookstore in Madrid.
Wow. Okay.
So, and this guy, he hasn't done much else. He did Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato. And I think that's really all he's known for. Those 3 books. But I mean, this is fantastic. What I will say is, if you have any interest, it's a good story with the characters, and there's some drama and there's some romance and intrigue and all the rest of it. But if you have any interest in a little introduction to Greece, it's fantastic because it touches on history, mythology, philosophy. It hits all those points, and it's a good introduction to a lot of things, actually. So there you go, guys. Nice. If you ever wanted a nice, easy, breezy introduction to Greek history, just read 2 1,000-page books in Spanish.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
You get it.
Yeah, you get it.
It's all you got to do. So,
all right.
I have one criticism of the book, actually, which is it starts out a lot with the usual sort of Athens and Sparta dynamic. And then, as you would expect, I guess, with history, Sparta became less relevant. Thebes became more relevant, so it switches over. Thebes becomes relevant in the book. Then it focuses a lot on Sicily, on Syracuse, and Sparta really just drops away. In the second half, they're just not mentioned at all. And I kind of felt like it's a wee, you don't spend the first half of a book focusing a lot on a city that you then just never follow up on. Like it just drops completely out of the narrative.
So don't mention it at all. There's no closure, basically.
It gets mentioned briefly, just like in the epilogue at the very, very end. But they disappear for like 500 pages, and even Thebes kind of drops out. Like it is interesting. It really focuses on Athens and Sicily then, which was the major event. But I still feel like Sparta didn't just stop; they were still there. It's very interesting that they just don't get mentioned, and we don't follow up on the characters again until a few lines in the epilogue or whatever.
Okay. So that's a bit of a pity.
That was my criticism. That was a pity. But having said that, I'm gonna be honest. This is a fantastic book, and I do recommend it. It's getting full marks from me. Now, Plato does not get assassinated because Plato was not assassinated.
Okay, so the title is a bit nonsense.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a spoiler for something that happened 2,500 years ago, but Plato does eventually die in like the last 2 lines of the book. But he just dies peacefully, you know?
Right. Okay. Why is it called that, though? The assassination.
I think they just wanted to follow up on the assassination of Socrates. Like, they wanted to kind of have that theme. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I've been trying to work this out all month. Maybe they want to say, like, the events of the book caught up with him and it was too much stress and it led to his death. But he also mentions that he was a very old man. Yeah. He was like twice the age Socrates was or something. Like, he was so old. So I don't think that, I think it was natural, you know?
Right. Okay.
Not quite twice the age, but you know what I'm saying. So
no,
true. Quick summary of the plot, and honestly, I'm only going to mention about the first 40% of the plot because there's too much, you know, to talk about. Okay. But basically, we have Plato. He's not our main character. He's kind of actually supporting cast, and we have a chap. So there's 2 families. There's a family in Athens and a family in Sparta who are related, but they don't know, and actually they never really find out as the book goes on. So it's kind of interesting that plot doesn't actually go anywhere. There's a girl called Alcaea, and she is the wife of an Athenian chap, Saphiro. And what's actually happening is, unlike the usual kind of sexist society, Saphiro gives her a lot of freedom. She goes around, sees her family and a lot, friends, whatever else. She goes to Plato's classes, and eventually Plato actually lets her become the first female teacher. And she actually teaches classes in Plato's academy. And also they made a pact that despite the norm, which was, if we've ever read our Greek court speeches, see Forensic Friends on our Patreon, they mentioned that a Greek man would have a wife, a concubine, and a girlfriend. But they made the rule that he wasn't allowed to sleep with any slaves, he wasn't allowed to cheat on her. Quite a modern couple almost. That's the start. So they start with a very happy, attentive couple. But they have a slave girl, Melissa, who's their chief slave, kind of the key holder for the house. And she really likes Saphiro, and she's hoping that actually she can get with her master and get rid of the wife. She also was the concubine of his father, so she's used to that kind of relationship. And she's the chief antagonist. She's always plotting and scheming, you know, things to do with her master and mistress. She gets her comeuppance and things, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of scheming and plotting from her. So that's one of the main dynamics. The main dynamic in Sparta is, well, women were respected in Sparta for their ability to produce warriors, but we have a family here where a woman is producing daughters, and where her husband is a giant brute of a man who basically beats her in front of the kids and is just horrible. So that's the opposing dynamic.
Okay.
And he takes after his dad, who was just exactly the same. He's called Leonidas, by the way. I can't quite remember the wife's name, but that's what's happening there. So the sad thing that happens, the first tragedy of the book, is Alcaea gets pregnant and has a stillborn child. And then we find out that this has happened several times. Okay. And they actually tell her, you can't have kids anymore. Like, this one has done too much damage to you. It's you can't have kids. It's done. Sorry. And she says, well, now he's going to, you know, we said he would never cheat on me, but now he might because I can never give him an heir. But actually, in the beginning, the husband's perfectly honorable and he doesn't want to cheat on her. He says, no, we're going to stick, you know, and everyone says, look, that Melissa's really sexy. And he says, no, I'm sticking by my vows, you know. So he's a good chap in the beginning. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of it, but basically their entire relationship falls apart not that far into the book. And it's a shame. And they grow estranged and he's, you know, getting off with all manner of slaves. She is, they actually take in a cook to work for them. And she ends up actually dating the slave, actually, like having a proper affair with the slave. So the whole thing falls apart. And I really turned on her. And I feel bad for it because I misread something. So it turns out the reason she's having these abortions or these stillborns is because Melissa has been poisoning her every time she's pregnant.
Oh, no.
But I misread it and thought she was doing it to herself. Because later she says, I'd love to have a child with the slave. So I thought she had done all of this, but I misread it, and I had to go back, and I realized that I was being way too harsh on her, and she's actually it didn't happen that way at all.
Okay. That's a whole different kind of story,
yeah. Yeah, because I completely flipped the book and I had to go back and be like, something's not adding up
that's
here.
What happens. That's what happens. Yeah, so reread the stuff, guys.
But so that's their tragedy. And sorry, I've made a mistake. I need to correct myself. The husband is called Calipo. The cook slave is called Saphiro. Okay. Right. A lot of this story is around Plato going to Sicily. That was something that Athens did, and he actually gets imprisoned there. By Dionysius. Now, I've read Plato's letters to Dionysius, by the way. You can read these. They're excellent. And he was trying to create the philosopher king. So he had this theory that if a philosopher was also the tyrant or the king, you would have perfection, basically. So they try... Dionysius, unfortunately, is not playing ball, but they think his son, Dionysius Jr., might be willing to play ball. And Dion, his uncle, is over there, and Dion is a pupil of Plato's. So he's teaching him philosophy from birth, essentially. So they think, well, your dad imprisoned me, but I'm going to go over now that your dad's dead, and I'm going to make you the philosopher king. And shock horror, he gets imprisoned again. So he goes to Sicily twice and gets imprisoned twice, because tyrants don't want to give up their power, and once they get the power, no matter how good their intentions were, it just doesn't work.
Doesn't work that way.
And Dion gets exiled and everything like that, and there's a lot of politics involved. But it's good to learn the history,
Yeah.
And really, go ahead.
So for an ancient history aficionado like yourself, it's a great book. But maybe not for the average reader, who's maybe not too interested.
But I think it's a good introduction, because it does it in a
2,000-page introduction.
But it's fun, it's a fun novel. It's not reading Thucydides or something that's maybe a bit drier. Like, it is actually a novel.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, cool. So it does a lot of historical kind of portraiture. Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the Spartan family, because they drop off from the narrative, not a lot happens there. Really, the brother-in-law, so the husband's brother ends up having an affair with the wife there, and then it just kind of drop off the narrative. It doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, like, it seems a bit too much now. Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot going on, and I really only want to touch a few points. But I mean, there's some horrible scenes of violence and sexual assault and all this kind of stuff. Althea has a brother who's an addictive gambler who gambles away all of his money, steals from his dad, Eurymachus, gambles away his... So the brother's Eurymachus, sorry. The dad is Piraeus, something like that. But he gambles away all his money, steals from his dad, gambles away more money, actually bets his ancestral home. And of course, the guys say, that's fine, you sign off your ancestral home because your dad might live for years. And then the next day they go to kill the dad, So... and they get his home, and of course, actually, gallantly, Plato rides to the rescue on horseback, and breaks it all up in a scene which I find hard to believe for a philosopher. But Plato gallantly comes to the rescue in a very dashing scene. But
sounds like fan fiction now. Sounds like you could write, because you're such a big fan of Plato that you just get overhead and just start imagining Plato like some kind of musketeer.
Yeah, that's a very musketeer-like scene when he comes into the rescue.
Sounds like something you would write. You just in a moment of Dumas and Plato absolute devotion, you just wrote a slashbuckler novel about Plato.
Yeah.
I can see.
So the last thing I want to say is the two things that massively drive the plot are that Althea actually finally has a baby, but not to her husband, to the slave.
Oh, no, that's too much spoil.
But again, I'm only covering the first, less than half of the novel. Maybe that's slightly later, but she has a husband to the slave. What's very important is her husband stops being Mr. Good Guy, and he actually becomes the tyrant of Syracuse after Dionysius. Then he gets completely corrupted as well.
Okay.
And in desperate attempts to get over to see her master that she loves, Melissa puts herself through all manner of tortures to get over there. So I'm going to leave it there, but there's a lot. I mean, although I love the history and the philosophy, I love the romances and the action and the drama with these types of characters. This book gave me basically everything that I could have hoped for in a novel, you know?
There you go, like, so you're happy man. You enjoyed your 2,000 word, 2,000 page epos, yeah.
There's a couple of nice little moments where they say, "Oh, here's Plato's star pupil, a young Macedonian chap," and of course it's Aristotle, you know. And there's another point where a young man's getting educated, and it's a certain Philip of Macedon. And Philip says, these guys are educating me, but I have an idea. What if we don't have Athens or Sparta or Thebes? What if Macedon becomes the leading power in the Greek world? And of course, that's Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon, who started that work. So it's always nice when these books give you those little, you know, it's not even really relevant to the plot, but it's just these little in references to be like, you could have almost written a sequel about that if you'd wanted to, like, you know, to these characters. I really like that.
Yeah, cool.
But I think without going into like too many spoilers and everything, I think that's really the best place to stop. A lot of the characters aren't that likable because Plato is, but he's not even really the lead. You know, Althea is likable, but then and her husband's likable in the beginning, but they both kind of get a bit bad and they're cheating on each other and everything else. The Spartans aren't really all that likable. The one person who's likable, actually, and Melissa's the villain. It's actually the cook slave, who has a brief relationship with Melissa before turning to his master. And when she's in love, Melissa's actually nice for a few months. But yeah, and vulnerable. But the cook, Saphiro, he's the only genuine nice guy. And he goes through some ordeals as well. But he's the only genuine character that you actually really like and you root for, I think, as the novel goes on. Everyone else has... I mean, it's believable, right? It's based on history, and a lot of these people have their pros and their cons, and they start good and turn bad, just like real people would, you know? Another cameo is from Diogenes. And Diogenes goes to a dinner party and then just pees under the table on their legs. And
this is the guy who said, I thought that doesn't seem time accurate, right? I thought he's from Alexander the Great period. I thought Alexander the Great comes to him and says, "What can I give you?" And Diogenes says, "Step aside. You're blocking the sun." Or am I getting some philosophers
wrong? That's true. I would need to look it up, but I can't be bothered. But I think that Diogenes was old at that point. Also, could it have been another Diogenes? But then, no, I don't think so. And
I the guy who just doesn't care.
Look it up. Yeah,
he wouldn't care. He wouldn't care either. So that's the whole point. That is funny. It has the same camera on it.
Some of the saddest scenes for me were actually the gambling scenes, where you see this guy, they keep giving him free alcohol and getting him to gamble away everything he has. He's borrowing money and they let him get into massive debt with them. They're letting him gamble for free and build up debts to the house so that they can then blackmail him and kill his father and everything else. And those are some really sad scenes, you know?
Okay.
And it estranges him from his family and all the rest of it. I didn't like those scenes. But Alex will tell you, I was reading this while I was with him. I read the first 200 pages during the trip to Athens. And then I increased my speed and finished the rest within a week after coming home. 100 pages.
Same like that.
Yeah, fantastic book. And there's some photos on our Instagram at Books Boys Podcast of me reading this on the Acropolis beside the Parthenon. So
brilliant. And what did you read after that?
My next book I read, I thought, look, I couldn't read another 900-page book, right? I read a little book that's only 100 pages.
What?
And it's called Brexit Unmasked.
All right. Yeah, you wrote to me about this, but I couldn't make my I couldn't get an opinion about it. So
this is by a chap called Albert Kemp. He's in his 90s. He's an elderly gentleman. He's got military service and everything like that, but he's never written a book before, and he just decided he wanted to do almost like this is his public service, you know? It's a short book. It's about 100 pages. Half of it is actually about his own history, really. It's starts with a bit of a memoir, which I suppose is giving him the authority to then say, here's why I'm now able to give my educated opinion on Brexit. And then the second half is basically him saying that Brexit was a disaster, right? And I'm not going to go too much into it because, we don't usually have political discussions on the show, but it was a nice book it was quick. I read it in a day. It was informative. It was good, but it was also a bit of a palate cleanser after a 1,000-page book. You need to read something short. And
all right, again, fair enough. Yeah. Okay, cool.
One or two quick. I mean, he mentions obviously the downsides of Brexit, which we all know about. One or two things that were mentioned that I would never have known. He mentions that when they did a survey of Northern Europe, 9 out of the 10 poorest regions were in the UK. One of which was Northern Ireland.
Really?
I would never have known. One was in Belgium, and the other 9 were all in the UK. Yeah, I would never have known that, and that was only a decade ago, I think. So there's a lot of things like there's some good little pieces of information in there that I wouldn't have known about.
Yeah, in a compact.
The one thing I disagree with him on is he doesn't like the idea of a referendum at all as part of democracy, because he basically says, I've seen this firsthand. I was in the wars, and Hitler used referendums basically to get some of the things he wanted, and he's let that kind of corrupt his idea of a referendum in general. I personally think that it's a good piece of democracy, so that's like the one main.
I would have thought so, yeah. That's
their one main disagreement. But he trashes the whole take back control stuff and get Brexit done and all the rest of it. And that's fine. I think it's a good book if you're interested. If you want to, if you're interested in Brexit and you just want to read 50 pages about it, it's actually it's really, really good. So I'll hold on a second there now, PJ. I think
what's going on?
Telephone is just ringing. Bear with me. We'll just see who's on the line here.
Back in a second then.
Hello, you're through to Books Boys. You've got Dean on the line. Can I ask who's calling?
Yeah, Albert.
Albert, we were just talking. Is this Albert Kemp? We were just chatting about your book there, Brexit Unmasked, on the show. So it's very fortuitous that you've called in. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Albert, I was just chatting to my co-host PJ a little bit about Brexit Unmasked. I read it this week. Fantastic book. I want to ask you one or two things about it. The first thing I'd like to ask, I mean, you say it in the book, but just for the benefit of the listeners, what really prompted you to write this? A lot of people have been upset and frustrated since Brexit happened over these last few years. What was the thing that just made you think, right, I have to get this down, on paper?
Yeah, what really tipped me over the edge was the failure of our opposition leading politicians in Parliament to actually tell what I consider to be the truth about Brexit, the amount of damage that it was doing to the UK economy and to national prestige in general. And they were keeping silent about it, but the reason is they seem to think that Brexit would damage their election prospects. I don't believe that personally, but that seems to be what was behind it. But I then felt that if they weren't prepared to speak about it, I would have to try to write something myself.
Yourself, yeah. And I think that's fair. And you're right. I don't go into my political opinions in the show too often, but just since we are talking about it this month, I think there is a lot of frustration about Brexit, and there is a lot of this idea that maybe the truth wasn't always told. And you hear about the likes of Boris Johnson with the buses that had the slogans on them, 150 million for the NHS every week or whatever it was. And most of the stuff they said turned out to be either misdirection or occasionally just flat out lies by the sounds of things. So I think it is good that someone's kind of put some of the information together and sort of thought, right, it is time to get this out and actually spread some awareness to the public. So I think it's a good thing you've done.
Well, I think it's particularly important to the younger people in the UK, because a lot of their rights that they had have been really taken away from them. Often, the ones that weren't old enough to vote in the referendum, they had no chance to have an input. And what has happened is that it's been made a great deal more difficult for young people to travel backwards and forwards in the way that they used to when we were members of the EU. If they're members of a literary group, a pop group, or classical music or whatever, all those things are much more difficult now for them to just go over to the continent and give their concerts and that kind of thing than they used to be. So it does affect people quite considerably.
I've heard people involved in the arts, and in particular, music touring, as you say, with that complaint. I suppose my question would be to you. Can you, I mean, I think that there's the disadvantages, I think, are obvious, right? I live in Northern Ireland, so we have been an area that has had a lot of issues regarding Brexit, and there's been backstops, and there's been, at the moment, we don't even have a functioning assembly at the moment because of it all. The DUP were involved, as you talk about in the book. So we were kind of a front line in a lot of the arguments that were going on regarding trying to get things working with the EU. So I've seen the brunt of what's happening. Would you say that there is any positive aspect to Brexit? Because I struggle to find one.
I don't think there are any positive aspects whatsoever. To be quite honest, I've looked very carefully at whenever they suggest something, there's always a lack of real evidence for it. Not a single version of Brexit was ever backed up by an economic model, for example. When some of them were talking about a no deal Brexit, that surely should have been backed up. If they want us to leave something where we're doing perfectly well, which was the case actually, for something that is quite nebulous and not really clear at all, they should have put forward decent economic models, but they didn't. I think the reason is they knew perfectly well they wouldn't stand up. Simple as that.
And you discussed there was different options. There was the no deal option, the kind of Canada style system, the checkers. So, you discussed these in the book, and that there were different percentages given for how much the economy would be predicted to decline based on the which model they went with. But of course, those were all estimates and whatever. But the thing that was interesting to me was every forecast was like, well, if we do this, it'll only hurt us this much. Not as bad as the other options. And I'm thinking, okay, where's the proposition that we do something that actually benefits us? It almost seemed that we just accepted we were going to take a hit economically.
Well, I think a lot of people, they during the referendum campaign, the Brexiteers were really concentrated on trying to make it appear a very simple matter, and if possible a one subject thing, and they got on to eventually take back control, which was take back control of your borders. And they tried to, which wasn't accurate at all actually, but in point of fact a lot of people believed it, and they concentrated on that, and far more people went along with that than any other form, any other reason, and in point, it was, as I had suggested in earlier correspondence, it didn't hold up at all, because quite certainly we needed the EU workforce that were coming here, and it was a kind of workforce that could come, do the jobs, go back to go to another EU country.
Yeah.
But it's quite flexible. Whereas what we're having to do now is import people from much further away, and in many cases they won't want to leave the UK at the end of their sessions.
It's interesting you say that, Albert, because I remember when COVID hit, and obviously you talk about that in the book as well, but when COVID hit, and we had been doing Brexit, and a lot of Europeans were discouraged from coming. And then all of a sudden, Boris Johnson and his administration say, we have a health crisis. We'd like to encourage some, nurses and things from abroad to come. And I just thought to myself, you've made your own bed here. Like, you don't deserve them right now. You've done everything you can to discourage people from coming. And now that you've got a health crisis, you want to say, okay, quickly, we need you again. It's like, that doesn't work like that.
No, definitely not. No, you're perfectly 100% correct there. And there was no real understanding by the public at large of the benefits that we were getting from being in the EU, because they simply weren't being told. The only kind of publicity that the EU ever got in our national press, for the most part, was published it was detrimental to the EU. Nothing good was hardly ever said about it. And if you talk to people about the four freedoms, we had with our access to the single market, for example, most people, they're just eyes would just glaze over. They hadn't the faintest idea of what you were talking about. So there was a widespread. It's not ignorance at all. It's just that people had never been told. They just didn't know that just how important it was to our economy.
Yeah, I think that people didn't. I've always felt like we didn't talk a lot about the EU until Brexit, and it's interesting. When I go to other places in Europe, I've seen European flags. I hear people refer to themselves as Europeans, European citizens. I've never heard that here. We didn't, obviously weren't in the Schengen area. We didn't use the euro. I feel like the UK has always felt a little bit distanced. So that played into this idea that people didn't really know what the benefits of being in the EU were. And I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate, I think. But on the other hand, I don't think the Remain campaign was anywhere near as good as it should have been.
No.
For one thing, they should have confronted them on the immigration issue head on, and they could have. That would have been. In point of it, really, there should never have been a referendum, as I think you would have seen in the book. There was an easy way, in my opinion, for the Prime Minister of the time, David Cameron, to put an end to the entire thing. He should have thrown the gauntlet down to them, to the people demanding a referendum in his own party, and people like Nigel Farage, who was heading UKIP at the time, and dared them to pick it up and say, you want Brexit, provide real economic evidence that it would be either beneficial to the country or at least wouldn't be detrimental. And that's what you've got to do before we can possibly have a referendum. Now, as I said in the book, he wasn't elected to play Russian roulette with the UK economy. And I think he was quite wrong to go ahead with it.
Yeah, I've always felt like it was this fear of the more extremists in UKIP. And I honestly don't think David Cameron ever thought it would happen. He originally delayed doing the referendum, then he, elect me for a second time and I'll do it. He finally did it and then immediately quit when, as you mentioned in the book, when the result kind of went the way it did. I think he thought he was calling their bluff and it just failed miserably.
Well, I'm quite certain that he did expect to win it, but he shouldn't have done, because he knew that the economic argument for remaining in was great. It was overpowering, really, and that should have been enough to swing the referendum in his favour. But most people didn't understand that, and they certainly weren't helped much by the Remain campaign and the way that they conducted it.
Yeah, I know you weren't in favour of the referendum. I personally have no problem with referendums as being part of democracy, but I would have liked to see a second referendum done. And I know there was a lot of talk about that at the time. And my reason for it was just that I felt that with it being so close and with a lot of people, it only took a few people to have changed their minds. And I think that based on the amount of lack of information and misinformation in the run-up to it and in the campaign, I really feel like, enough people would have changed their minds to invalidate the result. And with the seriousness of what we were doing, I think it was worth putting that to the test. And if you really believe people want it, you should be able to vote on it again, because you'll get the result, if you're that confident. But we never did.
Well, having had the first referendum, I've no doubt whatsoever that we should have had it would have been the third referendum, actually. Because people seem to forget that we had one in 75.
The original one, yeah.
But ignoring that, we should have had another referendum, because by 2019, there were clear indications that a majority of people were against Brexit. The polls were saying that. And that was very clear when... I mentioned in the book that I worked out on stores in a very anti-Brexit county. Every single district in this county voted leave when in the referendum, and yet on the stalls that I was working on, we were getting more votes for end Brexit and revoke Article 50 than for all of the Brexit propositions, which we also had down on a sheet put together.
Then when you add in the mass of Boris Johnson proroguing Parliament early and all that kind of stuff, the whole business seemed very shady to me at the time. But Albert, let me ask you this: is this a once and done? You had some stuff to say, you've said it, you're done, or are you still planning to write something more?
Well, to be honest, I'm 95 now, and I really haven't got the the incentive and impetus to do. I think I've done my bit now, and I would like this to get a decent airing among a few people, quite a lot of people, particularly the younger generation.
Yeah,
because they're the ones that are being affected. But the entire country is obviously the economy would have taken knocks. Let's be frank about it, from the COVID and from the Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, when we had a good, firm economic base, we could take those in our stride and come out after a period of time, and we'd be back to a decent position again economically. But by destroying what was a really good position, which we had, people don't seem to understand that it was being presented also by the Brexiteers as a either or situation where you could either trade with the EU or you could trade globally. Well, this was absolute rubbish.
Of course. But you mentioned that, yeah.
People didn't understand that. A lot of the people I spoke to had no idea, that. The tragedy was that the EU referendum was written just at a time when some very major trade deals that the EU had been years in the negotiating were just about to come on stream. I'll refer to the one with Japan, for example, which would have given the EU tremendous opportunities, particularly in the services sector, which was our main exporter. And instead of that, of course, we had countries that had opened up manufacturing plants in cars and pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing. Major countries all queuing up to leave, basically. And I think Nissan has only remained because they've given it such a good sweetener, to compensate for the amount of tariffs that were going to be put onto their cars if they tried to export to the EU. That is really what's persuaded them to stay. Otherwise, they would have left as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do sometimes feel like I'm living in a country that went from being very strong and respected on a global stage to living in a country that is essentially in decline, and that's and if that's what the UK wanted, then I guess they've only got themselves to blame in a way. But again, I do feel there was a lot of misinformation and everything. But look, let me wrap up. I'll put a link to the book and to your, where people can go and buy it and things like that in the show notes. But we ask every author one question, and I'll ask you this question. Aside from the book you've already written, of course, if there's one book that already exists and that you wish you had been the person to write, what would it be?
Well, I like the book from Suez to... Well, it's really I would be interested in writing historical accounts of, and that's really what interests me. Is what interests me most. And I read a really good book, which took us from the Suez fiasco back in 1956 up until the Brexit. Leaving the EU. I thought it was very well written, and I would love to have written it.
Okay, very good. Well, Albert, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I enjoyed the book, And I think you've done your service. I mean, you mentioned in the earlier parts of the book working in the Home Office and serving in the military and all the actual service that you did for us a long time ago. But I think this book is a very recent contribution, which I think that you should be commended for, and for putting some important messages out there. So thank you very much, and thank you for calling into the show.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to air my views.
No problem. Take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there we go. Thank you so much. And unexpectedly, early in the show as well, Albert Kemp calling in to chat about Brexit Unmasked. I do recommend the book. And as I said, he's
thanks very much.
95 years old.
So a lot of respect for writing that, yeah.
Yeah. PJ, why don't we hear from something you've read?
Well, let me tell you about a beautiful book, and you might remember who this chap is. It's Dino Buzzati. Remember when after my Italy trip, when I came back and I talked about Dino Buzzati's short story?
I do. I vaguely recall.
Yeah, so it's the Boutique of Mysteries. It was a short
collection story. The title I do remember.
Yeah, so Dino Buzzati is an Italian writer from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And yeah, I just really loved the short stories. There were some stories that really stayed with me, including The Seven Messengers, where basically a prince decides to look for the limits of his father's kingdom, and he just never gets there, but he doesn't stop either. He just keeps going because he thinks it's going to end soon. And he sends back messengers, 7 messengers, and they just never come back. Well, they do come back, but eventually it takes 20 years for the next one to come back. And he's out of contact with his family. It's set in old times. And they're very mysterious kind of tales. They're magic realist and absurdist at some points. But Il Segreto de Bosco Vecchio.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it has been translated into English. None of them were. It's The Secret of the Old Forest. And again, guys, we're just recommending books. We seem to be half the books we recommend are just not published in English. But the famous Invasion of the Bears in Sicily is a more famous children's book he wrote, and it's been translated. But this one was his first one, and I think his second novel. It is absolutely beautiful. It's really before he became famous as a short story writer, and it's very magic realist, I suppose, but it's more fairy tale-esque than your average Latin American magic realist, or even more Kami or Salman Rushdie.
And does it have dialogue, PJ?
It has dialogues. You would enjoy this. It has dialogue. Now, I suppose actually, to be fair, now, Dean, if I look at it, it does have a lot of description. It does have dialogue too. It is essentially a children's story, and it reads like a children's story too. It's beautiful, clear, Italian, and I'm very into children's books at the moment myself, in minimalism as well. So it's good at that. It basically starts off with Colonel Sebastiano Broccolo, who comes to stabilize himself, it says here, or to ground himself in the Valley of Fondo in the spring of 1925, a bit before this book was written, so set a bit in the past of what the time was written. And the Colonel Sebastiano Broccolo is really someone who has really lost touch of his inner child. I'd love to talk about that. But this is why I do love the book. The forest is alive, and he's basically come here to live because he has gotten part of the forest is from an uncle, I believe, after the uncle died. However, the larger part of the forest is now owned by the colonel's nephew. And the problem is the nephew, Benvenuto, is just a lovely kind of innocent soul, really. He doesn't want to harm or use or abuse the forest or take advantage of its resources. But of course, the colonel, being an adult, that's basically the message here, does want to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's and the colonel is kind of like a person you would expect from an adult existentialist novel, like Camus or Sartre. Someone who's very distant from himself. You have no idea really what he's feeling. There's a lot of observational descriptions of him. He's essentially the protagonist, which is odd because he's also so clearly not the protagonist. But he's the person that spent most time describing, but he doesn't really do anything. He's kind of like trying to do stuff. with the forest, and the forest is just always overpowering him because it's alive. So he's always trying to cut the wood or change things, and it just doesn't end up quite working because everything's alive. So everything's being personified here. In the winds, the forest, it's like the trees, even the house where he lives in, sometimes things talk there. And there's also a tyrannical mouse living there who wants to keep a mattress for himself. There is a lot of, you could almost say, cute kind of animalism going on, except it's not really cute. It's not even that the animals are always that nice, as you would sometimes expect from a children's animal book, I suppose. The character I like probably the most, I do love Procolo because he's such a distant chap, and at the same time, emotion steers up with him from time to time, and he doesn't allow it. He doesn't kind of allow it, so I kind of find it very interesting. That's his story basically. I haven't finished it, by the way, so I can't spoil it. I wouldn't spoil it. But essentially, it's him trying to take over the forest, and it's a bit futile. But a more serious thing happens, I suppose, and this is kind of more what gets you going if you feel a bit maybe bored from the pastoral scenes. He does want to kill the nephew. So there's a brilliant chapter which just ends with the phrase, and then he realized all of a sudden he actually wants Benvenuto dead. It's a bit of a surprise feeling for him. He just wants the kid dead. He wants to, I suppose the main reason is he wants to get the whole forest for himself. But I also think he might be jealous of him because the forest loves the child. Well, the animals, they play with him and everything. But everyone is distant to Sebastiano. And now here's where it gets interesting. There is a wind called Matteo, the wind Matteo, Evento Matteo, and he's used to be the wind of the valley. So he used to be kind of something like a mayor, or at least more of a dictator, really, because he wasn't that nice a wind. He kind of was very strong, destroying things. And so they managed then to lock him up in a well. However, Sebastiano releases him with making him promise that if I release you and make you free, you will do whatever I say. And Matteo promises. And Matteo is delighted, he's free again, and he immediately sets off to kill the boy, almost immediately, because that's what Sebastiano wants. But he realizes then quite soon he can't do it. He's too weak. He hasn't exercised, I suppose, for a while.
Okay.
And then it doesn't help that there's another wind who's already in control of the valley, and and things happen, and he's obviously not as respected then in the end as he is anymore. And this is what's interesting, because this is set just before, or maybe actually, I don't know, Mussolini was in power. I think it's just before Mussolini gets into power. And you can see that both Sebastiano Procolo is a Mussolini figure.
Okay.
But I would say that Matteo is not Mussolini. Matteo is just your average, strong, kind of working man who gets influenced by fascism. Right, and then does what the fascist tells him. So Sebastiano Procolo has no muscle, but he just dictates. And
it is easy to get influenced by these systems, and by the societal movements and powerful speakers and things like that. So we always have to allow a little bit of empathy for individuals, I think, sometimes.
Exactly. But what I love about the book, I'm not sure it's going to end yet, but it is beautiful just that the things the forest say, they do try to help the man. They kind of forgive him and the wind constantly in their naivety and stupidity, and they just kind of always show it. The book just shows the whole time that nature will always, nature versus nurture large, nature will always prevail. That's the message of the book. And also, it's just beautiful pastoral scenes of the boy playing around. And it's got, you would like this, Dean. It's got Dean Buzzati's own illustrations in the book, which I find just very kind of mystical, just very kind of slightly abstract scenes from the forest it's set in. And it's a very minimal kind of fairy tale book, very conscious, I find. This is the kind of children's book I'm looking at the most. So I highly recommend it. I can't tell you how it ends, but I hope you will look up Dino Buzzati. He's definitely got a lot of other books released in English, and they're always very thought-provoking, I'd say, very, very kind of, I don't know, like I just love it. I just love his writing. I enjoyed the short stories. I'm really loving this novel at the moment. Okay. So Dino Buzzati, The Secret of the Old Forest.
Brilliant. Well, I might just take a quick moment. That sounds very interesting, by the way. Quick moment to mention to everyone that you can find, of course, our website at booksboys.com. And of course, if you go to us on Patreon, patreon.com/booksboys, you can not only get Books Boys early, but you can also get all of our other shows. For example, I've been putting up some music archives every month as Music Man. We've got Dark Place Dreamers. Robert and I started a new series. We're reviewing the 80s show, Hammer House of Horror. And we've got a couple of episodes released. I think we've recorded 4 episodes. And of course, Alex and I, we're still working on Playboys. We're doing our ancient Greek plays. And we finished a few comedies. And we started our first tragedy, which was Prometheus Bound. And we might do a little bonus episode to review our performance of Tartuffe that we're going to see tomorrow. So you might get that.
Nice.
See how we feel.
Cultural lads, I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Very cultural.
And I suppose while we're talking about it, I might as well play the little ad that we have for Patreon.
Sweet, let's dance.
Let's dance.
Oh yeah.
The fact that we'll be true.
Yes, PJ.
Hello there.
Now, PJ, what have we learned about Shakespeare?
Hello.
Dark Place Robert and Playboy Alex.
Doing all right. Glad to be here again.
So I'm giving you those nicknames.
I'm not a fan of that one.
Well, that's where people will know you from. That's why
Nobody's going to know me from that one, but let's carry on anyway.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Join us for Shakespeare reviews, Spanish plays and poetry, rockstar interviews, film reviews, Dark Place Dreamers, and more. Patreon.com/booksboys. There we go. And I actually did a new Film Fellows as well, reviewing Ricky Gervais' Life on the Road. So,
nice.
Content. Welcome back to part 2 with the Dean and PJ, the Books Boy. And Alfred.
Woo! Whoa, baby!
Well, here we go. Part 2 of episode 31 of Books Boys. And in just a moment, we're going to have a big announcement from good Sir PJ. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah.
But first, we have 2 lovely voicemails that we've been left with some book recommendations. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll play those. We've got the first one. You might know him. It's a certain Dark Place Robert.
Hi, Dean. Dark Place Robert here. Just wanted to give you a wee book recommendation. The name of the book is The Name of the Wind. It's by Patrick Rothfuss, and it is the first in a series of books called the King Killer Chronicles. The storyline is very cliche for a high fantasy novel. It, small boy has idyllic childhood growing up with lovely family. Then the family are all murdered, and he goes off on his adventures.
Oh no!
Very standard. The only reason I'm actually recommending this is for the writing style itself. Story isn't captivating, but how the author actually conveys that story is what makes it fascinating. And I thought it'd be interesting for a read for yourself. Might get you hooked onto high fantasy, who knows? But enjoy.
Thank you very much, Robert. Although you'd have it sounds very good. You'd have a tough job getting me hooked on high fantasy, though.
He's been trying hard.
Low fantasy I can take, but I prefer my realism and my caricatures of realism.
Okay, don't want any hobbits going around your doorstep.
Yeah. Now, the second cameo, I'm going to give you the 10-second intro here. Recently, I reviewed a Zaphon. And of course, if you go way back to a previous episode, one of the in single figures, episode 5 or something like that, we did a whole episode on Zaphon. And so I recommended to someone that they start with Sombra del Viento. And of course, a friend of mine, Lupita, read the book, and it seems like it's potentially now one of her favorite books. So she sent us a little message.
Lovely.
Hi guys. Thank you for recommending Zaphon. It was a really good book. I mean, it has been a long time since I don't read. And yeah, I found this book really interesting. everything in general, like the characters, they were amazing. I think they were well developed. I could understand the feelings of each character.
That's true.
I could also identify with some of them. So yeah, the scenes that the author described, I mean, I could see Spain through his eyes, so that was cool.
Zafon's Barcelona is very,
it was
very much.
The suspense it was full of suspense, and I don't know, I like it, and I like that you don't know what is going to happen next. Like, I was trying to figure out the ending, and it blew my mind, the ending. Like, I wasn't expecting that ending. Like, wow, what happened? And yeah, I really love it. It was like, wow. So it's one of the best books that I have read. So yeah, thank you guys. It was a really great recommendation.
Awesome. That was La Sombra del Viento, and I've since lent her the sequel, El Juego del Ángel.
I love Safon, yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks both of you for the reviews. Interesting also hearing what other people have to say about books. Well, yes, it brings up what I wanted to mention to you guys, which is that I have an announcement to make that I am stepping down from my books boys status. It makes me a bit sad to say so, but I have decided also that I am focusing more on my writing and more on my music, and that this is my primary focus now. But I'm also delighted to announce that our Playboy mutual friend Alex has taken the spot, and I'm really happy for it because this is what I was hoping for. So thanks, Alex. What got me into podcasting was actually Alex with the Slumber Time podcast. And I've been thinking a while back before that also, because my cousin Porrick also had a radio show, and it just had been with me for a while. And then the fact that he made it during the COVID times just also made me do a few things myself, which you're welcome to find under PJ Burke Trap. And yeah, so it's been a hard decision to make, but I feel like it's time now just to focus on the other things rather than have too many. But I just want to say to you, Dean, thanks so much for starting this. It's been a great journey, and we collaborated so many things, so I don't see why it should stop. And I just wish you and Alex the very best.
Thank you very much. We're gonna miss you. You know, it's been a great time doing the show with you, and we've done a good 2.5 years. You know, so we certainly gave it a good long try. We're gonna miss you, but hopefully Alex will enjoy his promotion, and hopefully he can lend some insight, just as good as you were. You're very good at that.
I always loved his insight, and we will be seeing each other in May anyway. So I'm delighted to have that to look forward to. Yes,
that's true. We will see each other in May. Yeah, we've collaborated in other things, as you mentioned. We've done some music together, and we did our poetry collection and things like that. So I'm sure there'll be other things in the future. And of course, you're always welcome to call in if you have read a good book, just for 2 minutes, and let us know about it. But myself and Alex will be hosting the next few episodes, and we'll see how we get on.
Feel free to use my voice with all the "this is a holiday" and "are you listening? Is this a holiday?"
There we go. We needed it. We needed it one last time. Is this a holiday? It will be a holiday soon when I visit you.
I think it's a holiday just every day. I think that's what I like the JC quote. Yeah.
You're an optimist. You're an optimist. But for anyone listening, we are losing PJ, but don't worry. You know, keep calm and read your Dickens, and we'll pick it up. But look, I had intended on bringing back some more old friends, and I was going to do Galdós and Balzac for your last. But unfortunately, I misplaced the Galdós book that I had.
What?
Now, I have since found it, but it was too late to read it, you know. So instead of reading... Go ahead.
No, it's interesting I mentioned Galdos because I have a find it small surprise for you waiting when you get here in May. Not a book, not a book, but it's related to Galdos. You might be seeing some sacred spots, I'm just saying, here in the island.
Nice.
So.
Well, I, instead of Galdos, thought I would read, I have another Spanish classic, and I thought, I'll read that instead. I don't know if you know it or not, but Alex definitely doesn't, so I thought I might as well do it this month in place of Galdos.
What is it?
El Buscón by Francisco de Quevedo.
I haven't read it, but it's a classic Baroque play, I believe, right? If it's not Lope de Vega, but this is, I think, 17th century, right? Spanish literature.
Yeah, so we're talking early 1600s.
Okay.
Actually, it took about 20 years to be published. So this is Quevedo's only book.
So it probably is around Lope de Vega time. Okay, yeah. Okay. His only book.
His only book, which was published posthumously against his will. He never wanted it to be published.
It's famous, though.
Yeah, he kind of wrote it as a literary exercise. There's a lot of kind of humor and jokes and witty wordplay, and I think he just wanted to see how that would go. But he never actually wanted it to be published, which is interesting because at the very end, and it's not really a spoiler, but at the very end, the last line is, "You'll see in the next book how I fare in America." But there was never a next book, and there was never an intended next book.
Wow, that's really strange. I don't really know anything about it, so yeah, I just know about the author, and I hear the title many times.
I'm going to be honest.
Enlighten me.
I didn't love it. I felt I was going to stop reading these really old Spanish books because I never feel like I get enough out of them. But I thought after reading 1,000 pages and really enjoying it, I thought, I feel emboldened and confident.
And once again, you're not too enthusiastic.
No. Look, a lot of people say when you say you're reading old books like Victorian books or Shakespeare, like, oh, it's so old and boring. I've never felt that. I've never had a problem with it in English. And I don't have a problem reading modern novels in Spanish. But it's just when you get these early 1600s Spanish books, they can be tough going, I'm
wondering how you feel about early 16th century Russian or, Japanese books. I'm just wondering if it's something you just don't like around that time period.
Maybe. So I mean, maybe in translation, though, they would be fine because the stories are always fine. They're dry to get through. This is also, it's not that long, right? It's only, I think, 300 pages. But it's a similar story to Don Quixote, right? It's the picaresque. It's this chap going around, getting involved in shenanigans. He changes his name a few times throughout the novel, actually. But he just goes around, and I'll give you a few plot details in a moment. There's not a massive amount of dialogue in it, which is another thing that I find slightly tricky to get through. I do like my dialogue. It was fine. It was light enough. It was enjoyable. I don't know. I always feel when I read these 1600s Spanish books that I'm not taking nearly enough out of it as I could, or as I might have done if it had been more modern style or in English, But essentially, we're in the usual picaresque method. So this chap, he's a thief, right? He's a swindler. He's the Buscón. And I'm going to look this up because there's the full title of the book, actually. Some translations do just call it The Swindler, but there is actually a very long and full title here.
Then they usually do that for the novel. Yeah.
History of the Life of the Swindler, called Don Pablos, Model for Hobos, and Mirror of Misers.
Mirror of Misers.
That's fantastic. Mirror of Misers is fantastic.
That's a phrase that you're going to use a lot from now on.
Some translations call him the Swindler, the Scavenger, or here's one I don't like, Paul the Sharper. They've translated Don Pablos just to Paul, which I didn't love.
I can imagine.
But I've got it down on Wikipedia, so just as I said, written in 1604, published in Zaragoza in 1626 without the author's permission.
So actually just 1 year before Don Quixote was released. I mean, Don Quixote was probably written around the same time. Okay, I thought Quevedo was a bit later. So
yeah, they're around the same time, yeah. So look, it's fine. It's fun. He's a thief. His brother has already been caught as a thief and punished for that. Early on in the book, his father, who's another swindler, is I think his father's executed and his mother is arrested for being a witch. So comes from a questionable family, let's say, father, mother, and brother. He's a nice enough, likable chap, but he just goes around performing small misdeeds, a few thefts here and there, a few little swindles, and he moves around from city to city in the typical picaresque manner, There's little bits of humor in the book. For example, there's one girl who's chasing some chickens around and she says, "Pio, pio." And then she actually comes in to the priest and says, "I want to confess because I called the chickens pio, but that's what we call that's actually what we call heads of the church." And so I've conflated chickens with churchmen, and that's a sin, and I should confess and be punished for that. There's little silly things that crop up from. I didn't know that about Pio, but yeah. He makes a friend, Don Diego, who he's later estranged from, which is sad. And he finds out then obviously what happened with his father and his mother and everything. He goes to meet his uncle, and he hopes that his uncle will give him good news on his inheritance and help him out, and nothing really comes of it. But his travels, I would say he doesn't travel very far by modern standards. It's like the big journey from Segovia to Madrid, which is like 20 minutes on the train. It's not.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at one point, he makes it as far as Sevilla, which, fair enough, is a little bit farther. But there's a very funny moment where, after having been in Madrid, he says, "I've got to go somewhere where no one will know me. How about Toledo?" Which, again, is about half an hour by train from Madrid. So it's not very far. And I thought that was quite funny. He doesn't make it far, but then he mentions in that closing line, "I'm going to try America next." The New World, But he does get arrested a couple of times, and he manages to avoid getting tortured by befriending the jailer and this kind of stuff. So it's your usual picaresque things. There's little bits of humor in there. But it really is just him traveling around this relatively small area around Madrid.
Yeah.
I liked it enough, but I don't know if I would... If you're happy enough reading... this type of stuff that I haven't enjoyed as much as I should have, like Lada Heads and Don Quixote.
And Don Quixote. Well, it sounds more like if you like Don Quixote, you might like this. It's shorter,
it's a shorter version.
Period. It's picaresque. Yeah. I kind of like the sound of it, to be honest. I think I'd like to try that after I didn't quite finish Don Quixote, so I can maybe try it. I don't really mind the language too much, so
I never get enough out of them, and I always feel guilty, Whereas I don't with newer Spanish books or with even old English books. But I read one last book, and yes, I did go to Balzac.
Of course you did. You had to finish it down.
Just before I get to it, I want to mention one other thing. In preparation for seeing Tartuffe tomorrow, I had a free hour today, and I sat down for an hour, and I read one very quick play. And this is obviously a Molière play, and it's called, let me see if I can just grab it here, Such Foolish Affected Ladies, I think is the title.
Ooh.
I just thought I would mention it just in passing before I get to my last book. So I've just fetched the book here, and there we go. Yes, Such Foolish Affected Ladies. That was the correct title. So this is only 20 or 30 pages. I actually read it in about half an hour, but I just thought I would mention it. It's very funny. Essentially, this guy and these two guys leave these two ladies' company saying, we came to flirt with these ladies, but they really didn't give us a very good reception, so we're not pleased. And the father bumps into them, and he's annoyed because he wants one's his daughter and one's his niece. He wants them to get with these two men, to marry them, get out of his house. He says, "You're spending so much money on lip balms and girl things. I can't put up with these young women."
Right. Okay.
So then what happens is the two gentlemen dress up their servants as, one is a marquise and the other is a count or something. Two aristocrats. And the servants go in and woo the women by reading poetry and being gallant and saying that they're young men about town and they know everyone and they know all the goings on with the artists and the writers. And the women fall in love and they bring in some violinists and invite the neighbors over and they have a party. And then the two guys come in and say, "Aha, you're giving our servants a better reception than you gave us." And the idea is that the girls are now considered foolish for what they've done, and the uncle comes in and chases the musicians out with a stick and says, you've made us a laughing stock, and it serves you right. You should have married those nice young gentlemen in the first place. It was funny. I actually really enjoyed it.
Okay, fair enough. Good. Well, that's good because you're going to see Tartuffe. So let's see.
How I've seen Tartuffe before in Spanish, but I'm looking forward to seeing it in English, and hopefully I'll get a bit more out of it. But I just thought it'd be fun to read something by Molière before I went, and I just had that free,
to get that feeling.
Half hour today. Yeah.
That's cool.
But it was a fun read, and it made me feel good about going to see them. One moment I like is they speak in this really. They keep telling their father and uncle, he's so old, you've got to get with the times, and they have silly names for things. And I've written it. They tell their servant to bring the Counselor of the Graces, and she says, "Well, what's that when it's at home?" And they say, "Bring us the mirror, you ignoramus." So they call the mirror the Council of the Graces, and they say, "And take care that you don't dirty the glass by letting your reflection get in it." Which I thought was just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so you could use that phrase yourself.
And the guy writes this poetry that's all, you stole my heart, stop thief, I cry, and all this really effective stuff. It's his flirting method, though, brings us into our sponsor for this week, for this month. We're sponsored by the admirable company for flirting with ladies by asking them to compliment your own clothing.
Yeah, that's effective.
We can provide you with all the trimmings that you will need, frills aplenty, for this very purpose. And he says, why don't you compliment my powdered wig and my dress and my this and my that and my perfume and my knee lace. They make a lot of thing about the knee lace. God. And she said. He says, I think it's a foot longer than common. And she says, I have never seen vestimentary style carried to such a pitch of elegance. It's everything knee lace should be.
You know what to say about knee lace and the size, you know what I mean? Just saying, like.
But I love that line. It's everything knee lace should be. Like, she's just captivated and in love by this. I don't even know what knee lace is.
But look, if you got a big knee lace, you got a big, you got a big thumb, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean.
So, I'm going to get to my last book. It is, of course, by Honoré de Balzac. I think we've reviewed more Balzac than anyone else on this show, actually.
I think so. Maybe Dr. Litt. Maybe no. I think even Balzac more, yeah.
Maybe, but a fair few Doc Litt as well, a few Dumas as well. Sadly, I never got to review any Dickens because I'd read them all before we started the show.
Yeah.
And he's my favorite. But here we go. It's The Tragedy of a Genius. Do you know this one?
Oh, no.
Lovely purple book here. I never heard of it either. You may remember I stopped reading Balzac because they were going a bit downhill. This one was fantastic.
Oh, nice.
I loved it. I didn't look it up to see where it sits in the human comedy, if it's maybe in the provincial life or whatever, because it's not set in Paris itself. But I loved this book. It's very simple. It's a very, very straightforward plot. There's a guy who is a genius, and Balthazar. He wants to discover. He starts to do chemistry, and essentially it's alchemy. And he's searching for, it's not clear, he thinks he can make gold and diamonds, but he's also looking for the absolute. And people are saying that he's looking for the Philosopher's Stone and this type of stuff. Okay? So that's him. It's an interesting start. It doesn't start like a Balzac, but then you'll see the familiar tropes coming in a minute. So they mention in the early pages that this couple... And he's actually a Dutchman living in France, and his wife is a Spanish lady from a Casa Real family, a rich Spanish lady living in France. And they get married, and they have many years of just really good love and devotion and happiness. And they say, thank goodness he doesn't have any manias like his predecessors. One collected portraits, one collected tulips, one collected sculptures or something else. And they say, thank goodness I've got the only normal one. And then, of course, he discovers chemistry, and that becomes the worst of all. It's so well written, and there's some really nice quotes and things about how she feels that she's losing her husband, he's cheating on her, but with an enemy that she cannot fight because the enemy is not a woman, but science. And some really nice, pieces like that. But they basically portray the Spanish wife as just fantastic, and it's this, again, I know it's France rather than England, but it's this Victorian era idea about just self-sacrifice and devotion, and she actually gets totally excluded. So her husband basically starts completely abandoning her. Like, she doesn't see him for days on end. He's locked up in another part of the house doing his experiments. He's going around in old, dirty clothes. He doesn't speak to her. He doesn't give her any affection. So she learns chemistry to try to understand him better. And she succeeds in that, and she's able to converse with him, and she wins him back for like a few weeks or whatever, and then off he goes again to his experiments. And it's really a tale of love turned to abandonment. And he really pays no attention to his wife or to his daughters, and doesn't notice when he actually spends all the money. He spends millions of livres, I guess it would have been. Spends millions of money in the 1800s, so that's a lot, and gets them into massive debt. And the family just keeps saying, "But he's a great man, and we must respect him." And they keep putting him on the pedestal, no matter how bad he gets. And they all end up trying to work out the debts for him and everything like this. And he just keeps getting them into more and more debt. He ruins the family's reputation time and time again. It's really sad. And they just keep this like stalwart devotion. They think he's a great man. I'm not going to talk too much. It's 300 pages. Again, I'm going to try to keep most of my remarks to the first half. But one crucial thing, and it might seem like a spoiler, but it's important, is that eventually the mother dies. And, she's so long abandoned that he barely comes down to see her die on her deathbed. He barely notices that she's sick. And they actually say that his love makes her brighten up. So when he comes into a room, she seems okay. And they have their evening meal together, and then he goes away. And then for everyone else, she's on a sick bed. And they sell all the paintings, and they sell all the tulips, and they do everything they can. But it's the daughter, Marguerite, who actually becomes the protagonist later in the novel. She takes charge, and she's able to control him for a time, and she gets the whole family out to work, and she sorts everything out, and just when it seems it's all sorted, he then gets them into more and more and more debt. And there's one horrible moment where he actually takes a pistol and threatens to shoot himself if she doesn't give him the last pennies that they have to feed themselves, to buy bread that he wants to use on more supplies for his chemistry. So it's really sad.
Zola-esque, but I suppose it's similar in the sense of Père Goriot, old man Goriot, the other way around, where the daughters are just taking the last penny out of him, and he's just living a poor man's life while the daughters are living a rich woman's life. So it's all about exploitation, isn't it?
Eventually here, everyone is living in poverty, even though it seems that Marguerite might be able to recover it. There's a lovely quote here, though. How fight against its incessant, tyrannical and growing power? How kill an invisible rival? How can a woman whose power is limited by nature struggle against an idea whose enjoyments are boundless and the attractions ever fresh? What to attempt against the coquetry of ideas which freshen themselves? And it goes on and on. But basically, she's saying that science is his mistress,
Right, yeah.
And it's very beautifully written. It's a very fun book, but it's very sad as well. And there's some nice characters who help out. And there's a gentleman, a de Solis, who tries to administer certain things for them to help them out. And his son wants to actually marry Marguerite at one point and trying to look after her. Even at the end, even when he's ruined them over and over again, they still continue to give him respect as their great father, and you're a great man, you come from this great family, and you're in your ancestral home, which you've stripped bare, and it's almost like he didn't deserve that, actually. And it's this submission that they give to the head of the household, which I didn't really love, because he's almost become like the child, and the mother, and then later the daughter is actually looking after everything, but they continue to just give him this almost worship, The only difference is the mother had romantic love for him and would put up with a little bit more than the daughter would, But if you liked any Balzac or any of this type of thing, then I really recommend this one, The Tragedy of a Genius.
Okay, cool. Nice.
That
well, at least a good Balzac.
That's it. That's the end of my books for today.
Oh.
The last book we will review together.
Well, guys, it's been a wonderful journey, and thanks for listening. And well, I look forward then to listening to you guys. It's going to be a different perspective now. I suppose the next generation, the next phase, but not really that much because our mutual friend Alex has been there, not quite from the beginning, but quite. When was it? Maybe about a year after we started the show.
I think
you
so.
met him. And then,
yeah.
We started in October 2020.
And then it was October that I met him, a year later. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's been great. Thank you so much, Dave.
No problem.
Yeah.
It's been great having you on, PJ. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Even Alfred is thanking you. I think we've done good work with the show. We've recommended books, but we've taught Shakespeare. We've tried to help recommend books, to improve literacy with the kids. I think we've done some good work. And
I think so.
And it's been lovely doing it with you, and you will be missed. I will recommend everyone, if you would like to get in touch, you've got booksboys@hotmail.com, or you can head over to Instagram @booksboyspodcast, and of course the website booksboys.com has links to all the places you can listen and everything else, and it would be nice if you spread the word. We will continue the show in one form or another. The last thing we need to do is to play a song, and I had an idea. I thought, unless you have anything better, we might close with, my suggestion was Laughing Boy Dancing. The backstory of this was, PJ, you did some nice instrumental tracks, and there was one called Laughing Boy Running many years ago, and I really liked this strong piano loop that you used. So I decided to just use that and turn it into a house song, and I called Laughing Boy Dancing.
It's one of my favorite songs from you, actually. I really love that one. So I'm actually really looking forward to hearing this, because I haven't heard it for a while now.
Yeah, in a long time. And I mean, look, I tried to do some house bits, and I'm sure bits of it might come across as cheesy or whatever nowadays. But the main reason I want to play it is I think you did a really good banging job on the piano. But also, for a fitting goodbye to you, the song does end with a audience chant of PJ, PJ, PJ. So I thought that would be a fitting closure for your last episode of Books Boys.
Thanks so much.
And that's it. If the DJ would spin that record, myself and hopefully Playboy Alex will be back in about a month.
See ya.
To the rhythm, to the rhythm, to the rhythm. To the rhythm, to the rhythm, to the rhythm, to the rhythm, to the rhythm. We got the sensational PJ pork chop on piano. Classic piano house. Can you feel it? Here it comes! What's gonna happen? Laughing boy dancing! Hit it! Books Boys was presented by The Dean and PJ Burke in association with Thaddeus Penguin Productions. This episode was brought to you by our sponsor,
Neelis's?
If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at booksboys@hotmail.com or visit us at booksboys.com. The intro uses Driving in the 70s from the Of Soundtracks and Garage Bands EP by Trapdoor. And the outro uses Dog's Light by Bravo Max from the album of the same name. All music used is either podsafe or used with permission. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/booksboys, get the show early and all of our bonus Spoof Fan the Boys shows. And you can also check out our music on Spotify or Apple Music. Thank you kindly for listening to us. Please tell your friends, and come back next time for another episode of Books Boys. Read some books!
Oh no, don't record.